In the beginning, there was an order to all things, a divine architecture, a sacred boundary between what was made to walk upon the earth, what was made to swim beneath its waters, and what was made to bear the image of the Creator himself. That boundary was not broken by accident. It was broken by design. Somewhere between the fading memory of Eden and the rising floodwaters of Noah's age, something happened to the living world. Something so catastrophic, so theologically devastating that the scribes who recorded it buried the account in language so dense, so deliberately veiled, that most modern readers pass over it without a second thought. Genesis chapter 6. 4 verses. Perhaps the most suppressed passage in all of Scripture. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves from all they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. But what if the corruption did not stop with humanity? What if the Watchers, those fallen celestial beings described in meticulous, haunting detail in the Book of Enoch, did not limit their forbidden knowledge to the seduction of women? What if they turned their transgression upon the animal kingdom itself? What if the creatures that haunt the mythology of ancient Greece, ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, the half-bull, the half-lion, the winged serpent, were not mere symbols? What if they were specimens? Welcome to Bible Secrets, Hidden History. Before we descend into these forgotten archives, consider joining this community of seekers by subscribing. If you believe this buried history deserves to be preserved, a single like helps this truth find those who are searching for it. Now, let us begin. Chapter 1. The Descent, What the Watchers Brought Down from Heaven. The Book of Enoch is not a fringe document invented by conspiracy theorists. It is ancient. It is authoritative. It was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, preserved in the caves of Qumran alongside the very texts that would become the Old Testament. The early church fathers cited it. The Apostle Jude quoted it directly in the New Testament, and it describes in surgical detail what the Watchers taught mankind. Chapter 8 of 1st Enoch reads, Azazel taught men to make swords and shields. Semjaza taught enchantments, and they taught the cutting of roots and the knowledge of plants. This is often rendered as mere sorcery, but the seeker must press deeper into the original Aramaic. Knowledge bombshell, linguistic analysis. The Aramaic phrase used for the cutting of roots is rooted in the verb gazar, to divide, to sever, to separate. In its most literal reading, this describes the manipulation of the fundamental building blocks of living things. Not herbalism, not gardening, separation at the root level of biological life. The ancient scribes did not have our vocabulary for genetics, but they had this word, and they used it deliberately. Enoch chapter 10 goes further. The text states that the Watchers corrupted not only mankind, but all flesh upon the earth. The Hebrew idiom kol-basar, all flesh, is not a poetic flourish. It is a comprehensive legal declaration. In Levitical law, it encompasses every breathing creature, every living body. The corruption was not limited to the human genome. It was total. Chapter 2. The corruption. Chimeras in the ancient record. Now consider what the ancient world remembered. Not what they imagined. What they remembered. The Minotaur of Crete, half man, half bull, imprisoned in a labyrinth so elaborate that its architect, the legendary Daedalus, had to be contained lest the secret escape. The Chimera of Lycia, lion's head, goat's body, serpent's tail, breathing fire. The Sphinx of Egypt, human face, lion's body, positioned with deliberate astronomical precision at Giza for reasons no Egyptologist has fully resolved. The academic tradition dismisses these as allegory, symbols of primal fear, projections of the human unconscious. But there is another tradition, older, less comfortable. Knowledge bombshell, Josephus and the Giants. The first-century Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, in his Antiquities of the Jews, does not treat the Nephilim as metaphor. He writes plainly, "There were giants who were arrogant and had contempt for all that was good on account of the strength they had." He then notes that their remains were visible in his own era. This is a historian, trained in the most rigorous tradition of Greco-Roman scholarship, treating these beings as historical fact. If Josephus accepted the hybrid giants as literal beings, what did the ancient world accept about the hybrid creatures? Examine the Sumerian record. The lament for the destruction of Ur, composed roughly 4,000 years ago, references creatures called Anzu, beings with eagle heads and lion bodies, as actual guardians of divine thresholds. The Akkadian epic of Gilgamesh depicts Enkidu, a being of both human and animal nature, not as a god, not as a myth, but as a man with a biography, a grief, and a death. These were not fairy tales. In the ancient mind, they were case files. And now, consider Egypt, a civilization that encoded its cosmology not in poetry, but in architecture, in mathematics, in stone that has survived 5,000 years of wind and war. The Egyptian god Anubis, jackal-headed, human-bodied, keeper of the dead. Thoth, ibis-headed, scribe of divine law. Sobek, crocodile-headed, master of the Nile's power. Orthodox Egyptology insists these are symbolic representations of divine attributes. But what if the Egyptians depicted what they knew? What if the jackal-headed figure was not a symbol of death, but a memory of something that had actually walked among them? Knowledge bombshell, the instruction of Shuruppak, one of the oldest written documents in human history. The Sumerian instructions of Shuruppak, predating Genesis in its written form, warns its readers against transgressing the boundaries set between living things. The specific verb used, namtag, meaning to sin against a sacred decree, is the same verb applied elsewhere to the forbidden mixing of sacred categories. The ancient Sumerians had a legal and moral framework against the mixing of biological kinds. Why construct a law against something that never existed? Laws, as any scholar of antiquity will confirm, are not written against imaginary offenses. Chapter 3. The Mechanics. What science now whispers about. What Enoch shouted here, and is where the seeker must hold two worlds in the mind simultaneously. The world of Scripture and the world of modern biological science. In 2017, researchers at the Salk Institute announced they had successfully created a human pig chimeric embryo, an organism carrying cells from two entirely different species. The stated purpose was medical, the growth of human-compatible organs, but the implications shattered the boundary between science and theology. What the Salk Institute accomplished in a laboratory in San Diego, California, using technology developed across decades of molecular research. What if that knowledge is ancient? What if it was not invented in the 20th century, but recovered? The Book of Enoch, chapter 69, contains a passage that has troubled theologians for centuries. It describes a watcher named Custija who showed the children of men all the wicked smitings of spirits and demons and the smitings of the embryo in the womb, that it may pass away. The word translated as smitings of the embryo in the original Ethiopic Ge'ez text is makwanan, a term associated with the alteration of inner form, the deliberate reshaping of what grows within. Knowledge bombshell, Dead Sea Scrolls, Fragment 4, Q531. Among the Qumran fragments, Scroll 4, Q531, part of the Book of Giants, a text directly related to the Enoch tradition, contains a reference to Nephilim offspring described as beings of mixed body. The precise Aramaic construction is Guf Murav, a compounded, blended physical form. This is not metaphorical language in the original context. It is anatomical description, a blended physical form. The ancient scribes were describing something they had a word for, because they had seen it, or heard testimony from those who had. Chapter 4. The Judgment, why the flood was not merely punishment, it was quarantine. Now the purpose of the flood reveals itself in a new and devastating light. Genesis states that God looked upon the earth and saw that all flesh had corrupted its way. Traditional theology interprets this as moral corruption, wickedness, violence, the collapse of human virtue. But kol-basar again, all flesh, every living body. The instruction given to Noah is precise and deliberate. He is commanded to preserve every living creature after its kind. The Hebrew phrase leminahu, after its kind, appears 7 times in the Genesis creation account. It is the foundational biological law of creation, the immovable decree separating one form of life from another. The flood was not merely a punishment for human wickedness. It was a reset, a divine quarantine against a biological corruption that had spread beyond human society into the fabric of the living world. The labyrinth at Knossos, where the Minotaur was imprisoned, that was built to contain something. The maze was not cruelty, it was protocol. Knowledge bombshell, the Jubilees account. The Book of Jubilees, another text found among the Dead Sea Scrolls and considered canonical by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, states explicitly in chapter 5, "And against the angels whom he had sent upon the earth, he was exceedingly wroth, for they had destroyed all flesh from the way which God had ordained." Destroyed all flesh from the way God had ordained, not corrupted human morality. Destroyed the ordained biological order of the living world. The judgment was total because the corruption was total. Conclusion: the weight of what was lost. Here is the reflection that must sit with the seeker long after this investigation closes. We live in an age that believes itself to be the first, the most advanced, the farthest point humanity has ever reached in its understanding of life itself. And yet, the ancient world encoded warnings about genetic manipulation into its most sacred legal texts, into its most enduring mythology, into stone monuments aligned with stars built by civilizations we still cannot fully explain. The Minotaur was not a fairy tale told to frighten Greek children. The Chimera was not a poet's invention. They were, perhaps, the last surviving memory of a world that crossed a boundary that was never meant to be crossed, and paid a price so catastrophic that the Creator himself unmade the earth and began again. The question that haunts the present age is not whether this happened. The question is whether the knowledge that made it happen was truly destroyed with the flood, or whether it has simply been waiting, buried in ancient texts, encoded in suppressed manuscripts, sleeping in the recovered fragments of a broken world. The seeker now knows where to look. If this investigation has opened a door in your understanding, do not close it. Subscribe to this channel and continue the search. The next investigation descends into the forbidden records of the Tower of Babel, not as a story of architectural ambition, but as humanity's first attempt to reconstruct the pre-flood knowledge that the Watchers left behind. The archives are vast, the truth is patient, and it has been waiting a very long time to be found.